The Magical Plants by Paul Sédir. Introduction. The entire universe is a great magic, and the vegetable kingdom in its entirety is animated by a magical virtue. Thus, a title such as that of this little book would entail, taken literally, the complete exposition of botanology. Our ambition is not so high, and for good reason. As in any study, there are 2 points of view in this one. An inferior one, which is naturalistic and analytical, and a superior one, which is spiritualistic and synthetic. Modern science occupies itself with the former. We have chosen the latter because it is little known or largely forgotten in our day. Someone with more authority will certainly come along to present the third point of view, the central, the true one. In short, there are fewer teachings in this essay than there are indications for study. The desire of those who read this will quickly and effectively complete all our imperfections. Part 1. The Vegetable Kingdom. To obtain a general idea of this kingdom that is as accurate as possible, we must study it in itself, then in its relations with the universe and with man. We shall thus have the elements of a vegetable botanogeny, physiology, and physiognomy. Botanogeny will concern itself with the cosmogonic principles whose interplay produces the kingdom in question. Vegetable physiology will study the living forces in action within plants. Vegetable physiognomy, the science of signatures, the science of correspondences, will teach us to recognize, by its external aspect, the quality of the forces acting within any given plant. Chapter 1. Botanogeny. As we have decided to bring to light, in this little book, only the traditional notions regarding the subject at hand, we shall begin by presenting to the reader the most authentic teachings. First of all, one of the oldest monuments we possess, the Sepher of Moses, will instruct us in the theories of the initiates of the red race and the black race. Verse 11 of the first chapter of Genesis is stated as follows. Continuing to declare his will, he had said, He the gods. The earth shall make vegetate a vegetation herb and germinating with an innate germ, a fruitful substance, bearing its own fruit, according to its species, and possessing within itself its seminal power. And it was so done. This takes place on the third day according to the following correspondence. Fire, first day. Creation of light, water and air. Second day. Fermentation of the waters, their division. Earth, third day. Formation of the earth, its vegetability. Fire, fourth day. Formation of the sun. Water, air, fifth day. Fermentation of the waters and the air. Birds and fish. Earth, sixth day. Fermentation of the earth. Animals and man. If one considers Genesis as a whole, the initiated rabbi will teach us that, from a cosmogonic point of view, the figure of Isaac represents the vegetable kingdom. His almost completed sacrifice, his lineage, the names of his parents and his sons, and the acts of his symbolic life offer all the necessary proofs thereof. So as not to weary our readers with overly arduous symbolism, we shall not linger on this study, which any conscientious student can carry through to completion. Hermetic theories. The Hermetic philosophers conceived, at the primordial origin of things, a chaos where the forms of the entire universe were prefigured, a matrix or cosmic matter, and on the other hand, a generative seminal fire, whose reciprocal action constituted the monad, the stone of life or Mercury, the means and end of all forces. This fire is hot, dry, male, pure. It is the Spirit of God moved upon the waters, the head of the dragon, the sulfur. This chaos is a spermatic water, female, hot, moist, impure. The mercury of the alchemists. The action of these two principles in heaven constitutes the good principle, light, heat, the generation of things. The action of these two principles on earth constitutes the evil principle, darkness, cold, putrefaction, or death. On earth, the pure fire becomes the great limbus, the hyliaster, the great mystery of Paracelsus. It is a vain and confused earth, moist, a moon, a mercurial water, the tohu-bohu of Moses. Finally, the pure and celestial water becomes a matrix, terrestrial, cold and dry, passive, the salt of the alchemists. Thus all things in nature pass through 3 ages. Their beginning consists in the bringing together of their creative principles. This dual contact produces a light, then darkness, and a confused and mixed matter. This is fermentation. This fermentation leads to a general decomposition or putrefaction, after which the molecules of the matter in labor begin to coordinate themselves according to their subtlety. This is sublimation, this is the life of the thing. Finally, the moment arrives when this last labor ceases. This is the 3rd age. Separation is established between the subtle and the thick. The former goes to the sky, the latter into the earth, the remainder into the aerial regions. This is the end, death. One may have noticed the passage of the 4 modalities of universal substance called elements. Fire, air, earth, and water are easily recognizable here, and we can coordinate all these notions by establishing a table of analogy that can be read by means of the Pythagorean triangle. This process is found in India, Sankhya system, and in the Kabbalah, Tarot, and Sephiroth. Here are the principles in action in the 3 worlds, according to Hermetic terminology. In the first world, the Spirit of God, the uncreated fire, fertilizes the subtle, chaotic water which is the created light or the soul of bodies. In the second world, this chaotic water, which is igneous and contains the sulfur of life, fertilizes the middle water, that viscous, moist, and unctuous vapor which is the spirit of bodies. In the third world, this spirit, which is elemental fire, fertilizes the igneous ether that is also called thick water, silt, and androgynous earth, the first solid and mixed fertilized substance. Thus, every terrestrial creature is formed by the action of 3 great series of forces. Some coming from the empyrean heaven, others coming from the zodiacal heaven, and the last from the planet to which said creature belongs. From the empyrean heaven come the anima mundi, the spiritus mundi, and the materia mundi, viscous vapor, the universal and uncreated seed. From the zodiacal heaven come the sulfur of life, the intellectual mercury or ether of life, and the salt of life or principal water, the created seed and secondary matter of bodies. From the planet come the elemental fire, the elemental air, vehicle of life, and the elemental water, receptacle of seeds and innate seed of bodies. Advent of the vegetable kingdom. For the vegetable kingdom to manifest on a planet, it must be sufficiently evolved to produce, after having crystallized its atoms so as to form a solid earth, waters, and an atmosphere, as indicated by the account of Moses. Then a wave of new life descends, which is the vehicle of the first animation on the planet. It is therefore the symbol of beauty, and this is why the vegetable kingdom corresponds to Venus. It therefore has as its representative sign the spiral, and this is why phyllotaxis can serve to measure the degree of vital force of each plant. This vegetable life results from the reciprocal action of solar light and the desire of the inner sulfur. No plant can grow without the force of the sun, which it attracts through its essential principle. Here is how the anonymous author of The Light of Egypt explains the evolution from mineral to vegetable. Hydrogen and oxygen combined as water are polarized and form a substance that is the opposite pole of their primitive inflammable state. The heat of the sun redecomposes an infinitely small portion of the waters. The atoms of said water molecule then take on a differential movement which is that of the spiral. During this ascent they attract carbonic acid atoms and are attracted by them, whence a third movement, a hurried rotation. There, in new combinations, a germ of physical life is formed. Under the impulse of a central atom of fire, the predominant forces being oxygen and carbon, this union produces another change of polarity by which these atoms are again attracted toward the earth. The water receives them, and thus the first vegetative peat is formed. When these first vegetable forms die, their atoms resume their ascending spiral march. They are attracted by the atoms of air, and by the same process of polarization, arrive at forming, successively, lichens and plants of increasing perfection. The spirituous essence of the sun, having become, in the center of the earth through the attraction of each mixture and through coagulation, an aqueous fire, and wishing to return to its source, was restrained while ascending into the matrices of diverse species. And because these matrices had a particular virtue in their species, in one it determined itself to one thing, and in another to another, always engendering their like. If the spirituous essence is even more subtle, it passes to the surface of the earth and causes seeds to sprout according to their germ. The same theory is found exposed in a more concise way in the Kabbalistic treatise, The 50 Gates of Intelligence. The enumeration of the gates of the decade of mixtures is conceived as follows. 1. Appearance of minerals through the disjunction of the earth. 2. Flowers and juices ordered for the generation of metals. 3. Seas, lakes, and flowers secreted between the alveoli. 4. Production of herbs and trees. 5. Forces and seeds given to each of them, etc. Finally, to conclude this rapid exposition, let us provide the theory of Jacob Boehme, the identity of which with the two previous ones will be easily discovered. Created on the third day by the fiat of Mars, which is bitterness, the source of movement, vegetables were born from the flash of fire within this bitterness. When God had separated the universal matrix and its igneous form, and wished to manifest himself through this exterior and sensible world, the fiat that went forth from the Father with his will energized the aqueous property of the sulfur of the prime matter. We know that water, as an element, is an attractive matrix. We therefore agree with the previous theories. Before the fall, vegetables were united to the interior paradisiacal element. With the fall, holiness fled from the root, which remained in the terrestrial elements. As will be seen later, flowers alone represent paradise. Static constitution of the plant. Before undertaking a sketch of plant physiology, let us seek the principles at work in the realm so as to better grasp their functioning later on. If one studies the vegetable from the point of view of its constitution, one will recognize 5 principles. 1. A matter formed of vegetative water. 2. A soul formed of sensitive air. 3. A form of concupiscible fire. 4. A matrix or intellective earth. 5. A universal and primitive essence or memorable mixture, formed of the 4 elements, determining the 4 phases of movement: fermentation, putrefaction, formation, and growth. If one studies it from the point of view of its generation, one finds 7 forces in action. 1. A matter or patient, formed of light and darkness, chaotic and vegetative water. It is here that the Dursas of Paracelsus reside, an occult exhalation of the earth, by which the plant grows. 2. A form, active principle, or fire. 3. A link between the two preceding ones. 4. A movement, the result of the action of the agent upon the patient. This movement, which propagates through the 4 elements, determines the 4 phases we enumerated above, regarding the memorable mixture. All this preparatory and somewhat occult work will yield as visible results. 5. The soul of the vegetable or corporified seed, the chrysis of Paracelsus, specific power and vital force. 6. The spirit or organized mixture, the lephas of Paracelsus, or the astral body of the plant. 7. The body of the plant. To have a more extensive idea of these 2 classifications, one may seek their analogies in the symbolism of Greek mythology, which is very expressive and simply provides matter for meditation. Chapter 2. Plant Physiology. Anatomy. Nothing is as simple as the structure of the plant. The anatomical parts are reduced to 3, and it is these parts that will form, by individualizing themselves, all the organs. 1. The general mass of the plant is formed by the cellular tissue, which may be looked upon as the digestive organ of the plant, root. Individualization of cellular tissues. Intestine of the plant, seed, embryo. 2. The intervals between the ordinarily hexagonal cells form pipes that extend throughout the plant and conduct the sap by which the plant is nourished. These pipes or intercellular conduits are therefore for plants what blood vessels and veins are for animals. Stem. Individualization of veins. Circulatory system of the plant. Capsule. Female organ. 3. One notices in the cellular tissue of most plants other pipes that are formed by a fiber coiled in a spiral and which conduct air throughout the plant. These pipes or spiral vessels are for plants what the tracheae are for animals. They are also called the tracheae of plants, leaves. Individualization of the tracheae, lungs of the plant. From this initial sketch, we shall move to that of the functional relationship of these organs among themselves. The embryological development of the plant comprises the following phases. 1. Localization of the seed in a suitable matrix, damp earth. 2. The 3 parts of the germ begin to vegetate by feeding on the cotyledons. 3. The root begins to absorb nutritive substances from the earth. The plant individualizes itself through its respiratory and digestive functions. It is born. Here is, in substance, how Pappus summarizes plant physiology. 1. The root, plunging into the earth, stomach of the plant, it goes in search of food matter. 2. The leaves, plunging into the open air or dissolved in water, lungs of the plant. 3. The stem, circulatory apparatus, whose vessels contain it. 4. The flowers, superfluity of force, seat of the reproductive apparatus. We shall study these functions in a little more detail. The entire art of hermetic pharmacopoeia depends, in effect, on their knowledge, as will be seen in the second part of our study. Each seed, containing the tree in potential, encloses a mysterium magnum. Consequently, one will find in the development of the seed the inverted image of the creation of the world. The tree begins to manifest as soon as the seed is placed in its natural matrix, the earth. However, the earth alone is but a passive matrix. It cannot therefore develop the vital spark, or ignite the ends of the seed so that the three principles, salt, sulfur, and mercury, may manifest therein. The light and heat of the sun are necessary for this, because they stir the subterranean cold fire. Then the seed, drawn into this development, passes through its subsequent evolution. We shall examine in the following chapter, under section Culture, what happens when the matrix is not corresponding to the grain entrusted to it. Growth of the seed. Thus, we already see three ends, three dynamisms in mutual reaction, each comprising its trinity of principles, salt, sulfur, and mercury. The ends of the earth, the ends of the seed, the ends of the sun. The first and the last ends, therefore, through magnetic attraction, stimulate the development of the germ in two opposite directions, giving rise to the root and the stem, which, as is known, will play analogously contrary roles in the life of the plant. The well-being of the stem and roots depends on the harmony resulting between these three ends. Root growth. It is known that, from the perspective of the three principles, life and magnetic sensitivity reside in mercury. The subterranean mercury of minerals is almost always poisonous and charged with impurities. It is literally in hell, meaning it finds no other nourishment or object for its activity than itself. Consequently, as soon as a solar vibration reaches it, it engulfs it within its body, the salt, and its mother, the sulfur, both intimately united with its essence. Then the earth opens, its atoms gain relative freedom, and the plastic body, the salt, which was in a Saturnian torpor, becomes susceptible to attraction, and is indeed attracted in its homogeneous elements by the ends of the germ. Stem growth. Ordinarily, the base of the stem is white, the middle is brown, the summit is green. White indicates the tendency towards expansion, suddenly freed from the constrictive powers of the root. Brown indicates a Saturnian impression, the result of divine curse. The bark is the part of the plant that is in limbo. For if the great mystery is represented in trees, the vegetal kingdom, like all creation, was affected by Adam's fall. But in the beauty of flowers and the sweetness of fruits, one sees the splendors of paradise even more than in other creatures. Finally, green is the sign of mercurial life winding through the Jupiter and Venus of the foliage. The tree. It is certainly the most perfect type among all vegetal beings. In it are found the influences of the stars, the elements, the Spiritus Mundi, and the Mysterium Magnum, which is itself fire and light, wrath and love, like the pronounced word of the Eternal Father. Production of nodes. The shrub grows, through the mutual emulation of the two ends, the exterior sun and the interior sun, for the accomplishment of its purpose, which is the production of a sweet water that will provide the flower with the elements of its elegant form and beautiful colors. It is known that the 7 forms of exterior nature thus act within the plant. Jupiter, Venus, and the moon naturally cooperate with the expansive action of its interior sun. But Mars exaggerates this expansion, for it is none other than the igneous spirit of sulfur. Mercurial life swirls before it, and Saturn freezes and corporifies this dread. Thus are the nodes produced. Production of branches. Branches are the result of the struggle waged by natural forces in full motion when they seek to maintain communication with the exterior sun. They are, if one wishes, like the gesticulations of the plant that feels oppressed and desires to enjoy the freedom of its own will. Just as the vital force in man expels internal poisons in the form of boils, so too does the vital heat of the tree cause it to bud, especially when the call of the exterior ends is most pressing, as in spring. In other words, to continue the paragraph, the dread of mercurial life, or the salt constrained by Saturn, struggles desperately, heats up and becomes a sulfur. This sulfur gives a new impulse to its sun, Mercury. The latter tends to radiate, and Venus gives it the plastic substance of buds and shoots. The flower. The sun gradually overcomes the excesses of Mars. The plant diminishes its bitterness. Jupiter and Venus exhaust their activity and merge into the matrix of the moon. The two ends unite so that the interior sun, the vital force of the plant, seizes its principle, passes into the state of sulfur, and reintegrates the regime of divine freedom. The plant's paradise. The seven forms invert inwardly and upwardly within this same regime, and then enter into a play of complete harmony. The image of eternity forms in time. The sulfur of the plant returns to the latent state. The salt transmutes. The reign of the sun is inaugurated by a paradisiacal joy, which exhales with the perfume. Thus the bodies of saints emit an exquisite odor. This is what Paracelsus calls the tincture. The seed. But as Adam sinned, this paradise soon ceases and returns to the darkness of the seed, where the two suns come to hide. The fruit. It is the hidden spirit of the elements that operates in fructification. Fruits have a good quality and a bad one which they derive from Lucifer. They are not, therefore, entirely under the regime of wrath, because the unique word, which is everywhere immortal and incorruptible, even in the subterranean putrefaction of the seed, grows green again within them. For it is the word that upholds the earth, and the earth has not grasped the word. We had reached the triumph of the regime of love in the plant, that is, its flowering. When it is manifested, the ens transports itself to its place and consequently agglomerates a large quantity of plastic elements there, that is, moons which the heat of the exterior sun transforms into Venuses. Thus, the pulp of the fruit develops around a core which is the sun of the interned sun. The seven planets are found again in the fruit and determine its flavor, waiting for Saturn to make it fall back to the earth from which it had risen. Maturation. The qualification given to fruits as ripe to designate their point of perfection, the period when their juice becomes sweet, is poorly chosen, as this word indicates, on the contrary, their state of agony. The English ripe, the German reif, the Moronian ryp. This last word being a metathesis of per, are much more expressive. Maturation is the result of a kind of vertigo that the sun, or the ens, makes the paternal principle of sulfur experience, precipitating it from eternal life into temporal life. From this we will presently draw indications regarding the meaning of fruit flavors. Summary. We have made this rapid sketch, deliberately using all the nomenclatures. We will now summarize it in a few lines, employing the following naturalistic Buddhist or Ionian theory. The created world can be considered as resulting from the interactions of three forces: expansion, or light, or sweetness, the able of Moses; contraction, darkness, or harshness, Cain; and rotation, or anguish, or bitterness, Seth. We will find these forces at play in the vegetal kingdom. Let us suppose the germ placed in the earth. Sweetness flees from darkness and anguish, which pursue it, hence the growth of the plant. With the sun's heat, the struggle of the three forces becomes more ardent. Contraction and rotation exalt themselves, overwhelming expansion, from which come the bark and the nodes. But expansion, at the slightest respite granted by its adversaries, extends in all directions and puts forth shoots, inscribes itself with the green color, and yields to the life-giving forces of the sun that carry it, in the flowers, to its perfection. Contraction makes a homogeneous whole of the various organs, and anguish divides them into parts. They cooperate together because, coming from below, they must obey the solar force that comes from above. Thus the fruit forms, developing until the expansive energy is expended, at which point it is ready to fall to give birth to a new circulus vital. The OD of the plant. Since Reichenbach's discovery, it is known that everything in nature emits a kind of exhalation invisible under ordinary conditions, but visible to sensitives. This radiation varies in color, intensity, and quality. The top of a plant is always positive, and the bottom always negative, regardless of which fragment of the plant is presented for examination by a sensitive. Fruits are positive and tubers are negative. In a fruit, the side of the flower is positive, and the side of the stem is negative. These observations are currently used by the successors of Count Mattei in the practice of electrohomeopathy. However, I personally do not believe that this polarity is deep-seated. The soul of the plant. We borrow from a very well-written book by Mr. E. Boskowitz the testimonies of scholars who attribute to plants a life and a sensibility akin to that of a person. Without mentioning Brahmanic, Buddhist, Taoist, Egyptian, Platonic, or Pythagorean doctrines, all more or less deeply imbued with an initiatory spirit, let us recall that philosophers such as Democritus, Anaxagoras, and Empedocles supported this thesis. In more modern times, Percival claimed that the movements of roots are voluntary. Vralik, Hedwig, Bonnet, Ludwig, and F. ed. Smith asserted that plants can experience sensations and can know happiness. Erasmus Darwin, in his Botanical Garden, said that they are animated. The works of von Martius prove the same thing. And finally, Gustav Fechner wrote a book entitled Nana, or On the Soul Life of Plants. The following are the characteristics of analogy that plants present with beings endowed with personality. Respiration takes place through Malpighi's tracheae, which are formed of a cellular ribbon coiled in a spiral and endowed with contraction and expansion. Air is indispensable to their life, and it has an action on sap analogous to the one it has on blood. The underside of leaves is pierced with stomata, the organs of this respiration. They retain oxygen from the air and exhale carbonic acid. They feed on the carbon they extract from carbonic acid and, consequently, exhale a large quantity of oxygen during the day. Their roots serve as a stomach as do their leaves. Sap is analogous to chyle. Plant nutrition is a function so active that Bradley calculated that an oak tree in 100 years absorbs 280,000 kilos of nutrients. The excretions of a plant are almost all vivifying substances for man, just as, in turn, the excretions of animals are for the plants themselves. If the circulation of sap is not yet a fact proven in a striking manner, it is known at least that plants perspire very heavily. How can one explain the movements of plants in search of light, of the sun, of their nourishment, that is to say, of a suitable terrain? How can one explain their amorous power, the heat, and the electricity they release at the moment of their fertilization? Finally, from where do the marvelous properties of the resurrection plant and the rose of Jericho come? The initiate observes all these phenomena and admires once again the ingenious wisdom of his predecessors, as well as the penetrating intuition of the people who gave every tree its hamadryad, every flower its fairy, and every herb its genius. Do the scientific observations summarized here not truly depict the obscure movements of the soul of elementals striving toward consciousness? Plants and animals. The ingenious Bonnet of Geneva devotes the entire 10th part of one of his works to a parallel between plants and animals. He expresses the result of his numerous comparisons in the following way. Nature descends by degrees from man to the polyp, from the polyp to the sensitive plant, from the sensitive plant to the truffle. Higher species always hold to lower species through some characteristic, these, in turn, to even lower species. Organized matter has received an almost infinite number of diverse modifications, and all are shaded like the colors of a prism. We make dots on an image, we draw lines upon it, and we call this creating genera and classes. We perceive only the dominant tints, and the delicate nuances escape us. Plants and animals are, therefore, merely modifications of organized matter. They all participate in the same essence, and the distinctive attribute remains unknown to us. The plant vegetates, feeds, grows, and multiplies. But vegetable seeds are much more numerous than eggs or fertilized ovules in animals, except for the lower species. Likewise, an individual produces many more buds in the first kingdom than fetuses in the second. Nourishment is absorbed by some through porous surfaces, and by others through a single mouth. Alimentation by external routes is incessant, whereas in developed animals, it occurs at intervals and through internal routes. The majority of plants are hermaphroditic. Finally, plants are immobile except for the movement of leaves and some flowers toward the sun. Animals are mobile. General conclusion. It results from this brief study that the general movement of terrestrial life, in these three lower kingdoms, appears as the gigantic effort of an organized power, physical nature, attaining the free will characteristic of the human kingdom, by passing from the infinity of the mineral kingdom to individualization, vegetables, and then to spontaneous movement, animals. This is what is strikingly expressed by the 4 diagrams completed above according to Medathenus, which allow us to consider each kingdom as a medium whose atoms are at a particular phase of movement. At rest, then in a state of equilibrium, then in a state of vortex, and finally in a state of resolution. The 5th, 6th, and 7th states represent kingdoms superior to the current evolution of the human race. Chapter 3. Signatures. Vegetable physiognomy. Each plant is a terrestrial star. Its celestial properties are inscribed on the colors of its petals, and its terrestrial properties on the shape of its leaves. All of magic is contained therein, since plants represent the entire totality of astral powers. There are 3 different keys that one can use to recognize the inner virtues of a plant by its outer properties: the binary key, the quaternary or elemental/zodiacal key, and the septenary or planetary key. Binary key. Here is the theory according to St. Martin with 2 examples of practical application. There is in everything, whether material or immaterial, an impulsive force, which is the principle from which this thing receives its existence. But this universal impulsive force that we observe in nature would not take place if a compressive and, as it were, opposite force did not tighten it in order to increase its intensity. It is this compressive force which, by giving it spring, simultaneously affects the development and the appearance of all the properties and all the forms generated by the momentum of the impulsive force. Vegetation, especially, offers us these 2 laws distinctly in all their different manifestations. In the pit of a fruit, the resistance outweighs the force, and so it remains in inaction. When it has been planted and vegetation is established, it only occurs because the force combats the resistance and reaches an equilibrium with it. When the fruit appears, it is the force that has prevailed over the resistance and has managed to overcome all obstacles, although this fruit nevertheless offers itself to us only as the union of a force and a resistance, in that it is composed of both its substantialized properties and its envelope, which contains, gathers, preserves, and corroborates them, according to this universal law of things. From this table, we can see what wounds the primitive and eternal nature, which we have recognized as having been man's prerogative, has suffered. St. Martin. The object of vegetation, this adept continues in the remainder of the same work, is to transmit to us the rays of beauty, color, and perfection that have their source in the higher region, and which strive only to enter into our lower region. Each grain of seed is a little chaos. Everything in nature is composed of a dividing action, force, and a divisible action, resistance. When the latter is deprived of the former, it produces water. When it does not undergo this deprivation, it produces fire. Just as the union of fire and water is manifested by the green color of leaves, putrefaction is localized in the roots, and sublimation in the vivid colors of flowers and fruits. Seeds, being the prison of the higher powers, analogically retrace the history of the fall and the myth of Saturn devouring his children. Thus, generation is a struggle whose phases are expressed by the signature, and there is no being that does not retrace, through its external form, the history of its own birth. In the oak, the almond, of an acrid and austere taste, enclosed within its acorn, indicates that this tree has undergone a violent effort on the part of resistance, an effort that tended toward nothing less than its annihilation. If, with this same gaze, we consider the vine leaf, the grape seed, and the properties of wine, we shall soon recognize that in the seed, water has been extremely concentrated by resistance, which is why it develops with such abundance in the vine shoots. That in this expansion of water, the vine leaf indicates by its shape that it is so abundant only because it has been separated from its fire, and that its factors have been binary, as in an infinity of other plants. That consequently, the fire has also been extremely separated from the water, which is made known at the branch of the vine, where the leaves and the grape stalk alternate with one another, but always on the opposite side. That, according to its law, this fire always rises higher than the water, which is made known by the grape stalk, which always rises above its corresponding leaf. That this fire is also very close to the primitive life, which is, so to speak, one with it, which is the reason why the grape berry takes on such a regular spherical shape, as having pumped through its stamens and pistil the complete circle of astral virtualities, the number of which embraces the entire circumference and establishes the equilibrium between resistance and force. That, for this reason, it is so healthy and salutary when taken with measure and moderation. But that, given the divided or binary source from which it derives, it must cause the greatest ravages when taken to excess. That, moreover, these excesses are of a remarkable nature. 1. In that they lead to dispute, the absence of reason, fighting, and murder. 2. In that they lead to the lust that is written in so many ways upon the shape of the seed. 3. In that drunkenness, while exciting lust, is nevertheless far from being fatal to generation. Elementary classification. It is known that each of the 4 elements, with the quintessence, corresponds to each of our 5 senses. That is to say, each of these 5 forms of movement reveals to us the qualities of objects through a vibration of one of our sensory nerve centers. Earth corresponds to smell, odor. Water corresponds to taste, flavor. Fire corresponds to sight, form. Air corresponds to touch, volume. The quintessence corresponds to hearing, spirit. Hence table number 1. This includes only the simple types, which are purely theoretical. In reality, one must combine these 4 elements with one another, and one will obtain table number 2 of the signs of the zodiac, which will be able to indicate the general character of a plant. If now one wishes to know a priori the qualities of a plant signed, for example, by Aries, by referring to this latter table, One sees that Aries is a fire of earth. The qualities of this plant will therefore be, according to the first table, a penetrating and fatty odor, a pungent flavor with nothing disagreeable about it. The flowers will be orange-red, and the plant will be small in size, though robust. We believe that this example will suffice for the understanding of this method. Furthermore, here are the signatures of each of the zodiacal signs, compiled from a great number of authors. One will thus be able to perfect oneself in practice. Zodiacal signatures. Plants signed by Aries will be hot and dry. The element of fire will dominate in them. Finally, their conformation will offer more or less distant resemblances to the head and its subdivisions. The eyes, the nose, the tongue, the teeth, the beard. They have yellow flowers and acrid flavor, thin stems and leaves, diphylous or bipetalous. Perfume, myrrh. Plants signed by Taurus are cold and dry. The element of earth dominates in them. Their taste is consequently sour, with a sweet odor. They are tall, give off aromatic effluvia, freeze easily, and bear much fruit. Some are shaped like a throat. These are plants with androgynous flowers. Perfume, the aromatic cock. Plants signed by Gemini are moderately hot and moist. Their element is air. They are herbs with white or pale flowers, very green, with a sweet flavor, often lactescent. They present some conformity of figure with the shoulders, arms, hands, and breasts. They are often heptaphilous. Perfume, mastic. Plants signed by Cancer are cold and moist. Water dominates. They are insipid, marshy, with white or ashen flowers. They often grow at the water's edge. Their leaves take on the shape of the lungs, liver, or spleen. They are spotted, blistered, with 5 petals. Perfume, camphor. Plants signed by Leo are hot and dry, dominated by the element of fire. They have red flowers or a poignant or bitter flavor, or those that burn very quickly. Their fruit has the figure of the stomach or the heart. They are cruciferous. Perfume, incense. Plants signed by Virgo are cold, dry, and contain much earth. They are creeping plants with hard and brittle tissues. Their leaves and roots take on the semblance of the abdomen or the intestines. In the vast majority of cases, their flowers have 5 petals. Perfume, white sandalwood. Plants signed by Libra are hot, moist, and aerial. Their flowers are tawny, their stems tall, soft, and flexible. Their fruits or leaves recall the shape of the kidneys, the navel, or the bladder. Their flavor is sweet. They grow preferably in stony terrain. Perfume, galbanum. Plants signed by Scorpio are hot and moist. They can be insipid, watery, slimy, milky, or fetid, and they may have the shape of human sexual organs. Perfume, red coral. Plants signed by Sagittarius are hot and dry, dominated by the element of fire. They are bitter and borrow the shapes of the anal region. Perfume, aloe. Plants signed by Capricorn are cold and dry. The element of earth dominates in them. Their flowers are greenish. Their sap coagulates and is toxic. Perfume, nard. Plants signed by Aquarius are moderately hot and moist. They are also aerial and very often aromatic. They take on the shape of the legs. Perfume, spurge. Plants ruled by Pisces are cold and moist. Water seems to dominate them. Their flavor is bland. Their form is that of fingers. They grow in cool and dark places, by the water's edge. Perfume, thyme. Septenary or planetary classification. Here, in a few words, are the bases of classification. Saturn, astringent, concentrating. Jupiter, radiant, majestic. Mars, anger, thorns. Sun, beauty and nobility, harmony. Venus, suavity. Mercury, indeterminate. Moon, strangeness. Expanding on these characteristics, we find the flavor is given by the salt of the earth where the plant grows. It indicates the plant's ideal and the path to follow to extract its balm. The leaves and stem indicate the dominant planet. In a plant, the root is of Saturn, the seed and bark of Mercury, the strong wood of Mars, the leaves of the Moon, the flowers of Venus, the fruit of Jupiter. Planetary signatures. Plants signed by Saturn are heavy, glutinous, astringent with a bitter, acrid, or acidic flavor. They are roots, plants which produce fruits without flowers, which produce without seeds, which are asperous with black berries, whose odor is penetrating, form frightening, shade sinister, which are resinous, narcotic, consecrated to funereal matters, and which grow slowly. Plants ruled by Jupiter have a sweet, suave, subtle, styptic, and even tart flavor. All plants bearing fruits, even without flowers, those with many fruits and a fortunate appearance. Plants ruled by Mars are acidic, bitter, acrid, and pungent. They are poisonous due to excess heat. They are thorny, burn to the touch, or sting the eyes. Solar plants are aromatic with a tart flavor. They ward off lightning and are antidotes. There are also those that remain evergreen. They are good for divination and against evil spirits. They turn towards the sun or bear its figure on their leaves, flowers, or fruits. Plants governed by Venus have a sweet, pleasant, and unctuous flavor. They produce flowers without bearing fruit. They have many seeds and are aphrodisiac. Their scent is almost always suave. Plants corresponding to Mercury have a mixed flavor. They produce flowers and leaves without fruit. The leaves are small and the colors varied. Plants ruled by the Moon are insipid, live next to or in water. They are cold, milky, narcotic, anti-aphrodisiac. Their leaves are often large. Plant friendships and enmities according to their signature. Friendly signs: Taurus, Cancer and Sagittarius. Gemini, Libra and Aquarius. Cancer, Libra. Virgo, Taurus. Scorpio, Cancer. Enemy signs: Taurus, Libra, Scorpio. Gemini, Capricorn. Cancer, Sagittarius. Virgo, Aries and Leo. Enemy planets: Saturn, Mars, Sun. Friendly planets: Venus with all, especially with Mars. Friendly planets: Mercury with all, especially with Jupiter. Combinations of influences. Here are some examples to help the student of the results produced by the combined influences of several planets. Saturn dominant, for example, gives a plant of black or dirty gray color, with a hard and rough stem of an acerbic, sour, or salty flavor. Tall and slender with dark flowers. It almost always calls upon Mars, and then the plant becomes gnarled, knotty, branched, with a wild and tormented appearance. Saturn and Venus give a large, strong tree, because Venusian sweetness provides matter for Saturn's sulfur to develop. If Jupiter is near Venus, the plant is full of strength and virtue. If Mercury influences a plant between Venus and Jupiter, it is even more perfect. It is a beautiful plant of medium size with white or blue flowers. If the sun approaches the preceding, the flower turns yellow. If Mars is not contrary to them, the plant is capable of resisting all evil influences, and it yields excellent remedies. But such a combination is very rare, because it is close to paradise. If Mars and Saturn contradict each other, with Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter, it is a poisonous tree, with reddish flowers tending towards white, because of Venus, rough to the touch, and of an execrable taste. If, although Mars and Saturn contradict each other, Jupiter and Venus are powerful there, and Mercury very weak, the plant is warm and curative. The stem is thin, somewhat rough and thorny. The flowers are whitish. If Venus is close to Saturn, if the moon is not countered by Mars and Jupiter is free, this gives a pretty plant, tender, delicate, with white flowers, harmless but of little use. Part 2. Man and Plant. The plant kingdom, being subject to Venus, has only one function concerning man, that of nourishing him. The plant can nourish man, that is to say, repair his organic losses. 1. In his physical body, i.e. nutrition. 2. In his electromagnetic body, i.e. the cure of diseases. 3. In his astral body. Somnambulism, ecstasies, magical ceremonies, divination. Man, in turn, can do 3 things for the plant. Cultivate it, magical agriculture. Redeem it, magical growth. Resurrect it, palingenesis. We will study each of these 6 articles separately. Chapter 4. Nutrition. I do not wish to reiterate here a plea in favor of vegetarianism. Wiser individuals than myself have authoritatively highlighted its advantages. I will only permit myself to indicate a few rules for vegetarian beginners. 1. Transition slowly from cryophagy to vegetarianism, and only switch fermented beverages for milk or water once the dietary change for solid foods is accomplished. This change should be aided by a greater consumption of fleshy or watery fruits. 2. Affect this dietary change in the countryside. 3. Remain vegetarian in cities, and especially in Paris, only if one does not take meals at a restaurant, and if there is no general weakness. 4. Do not be afraid to eat a larger quantity of vegetable foods than the quantity of animal foods one previously consumed. 5. Keep fish in one's diet for a long time. Eggs, milk, and butter should never be excluded except in exceptional cases of asceticism. 6. Finally, learn at the same time to gradually govern one's physical organism and to become master by will of the small functional irregularities that may occur. How one should take one's meals. Generally speaking, the more strength one expends to accomplish an act, the more profitable that act becomes for us. Thus, pushing things to the extreme, we should cultivate our own food plants, harvest them, and prepare them ourselves, using utensils solely for these purposes. For naturalist and pantheist initiations, which develop the student from bottom to top, or from the outside inward, one begins by purifying and perfecting one's astral body and finally one's intelligence. Thus it is ordained for Brahmins and Hindu ascetics to prepare their own food, and never to let anyone other than their wife touch the copper utensils. Hence also come the prescriptions related to body position during meals. There are relationships between the electromagnetic currents of a planet and those of the individuals living on its surface. It would be too long to explain this theory here. Let us simply say that the best for our regions is to eat while facing north. Another prescription is that of ablutions. Hindu priests wash their hands, feet, mouth, nose, eyes, and ears while repeating a sacred invocation. Corresponding to this, in our regions, is the benedicity which, when pronounced magically, possesses a real dynamizing value. Finally, a last prescription is that of silence. It is observed by religious people worldwide. Its purpose, by concentrating attention on the act of eating, is to significantly reduce the quantity of matter required for replenishment. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.